The Big Old Rambutan Tree, The Journey of a Book by Kathy and Peter Creamer.
The idea for this picture book began many years ago when we were living in Singapore with our young family and working at the zoological gardens as volunteer docents. We both became fascinated by the orangutans in the zoo and spent a lot of time getting to know Ah Meng, one of the stars of the orangutan enclosure. Ah Meng had been taken from the wild as a tiny baby and had been kept as a pet by a family in Singapore. As she grew up, the family realised that they couldn't provide the right environment for an adult orangutan. And as she had spent most of her life living as a member of a human family, she couldn't possibly return to a wild habitat in the rainforest, as she'd be far too vulnerable. They knew that the zoo was probably be the best place for her, as she could be with other orangutans and learn to be the ape she really was. The gentle Ah Meng settled in well at the zoo, but even so, she still sought the company of humans. So she was allowed to meet the zoo visitors at the daily breakfast with an orangutan event, which she thoroughly enjoyed, as there was usually rambutan fruit on the menu. I became so interested in orangutans that I decided to write and illustrate a children's picture book about Ah Meng to help raise awareness of the threat to orangutans in the wild due to palm oil development and the illegal exotic pet market, and to help raise funds for the Singapore Zoo's orangutan conservation and educational programs. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation were interested in funding the printing costs of the book, so My Cousin Ah Meng was published. I went on to produce another children's picture book about orangutans, The Old Man of the Forest, which has a similar message to the book about Ah Meng. This picture book was for Monkey World, an ape rescue and rehabilitation centre in England. After reading about the present-day threat to orangutans in the wild and watching TV programs about the massive destruction of the Indonesian rainforest for palm oil development, I felt motivated to create yet another picture book to help raise funds for orangutan conservation. I first wrote and illustrated The Big Old Rambutan Tree over 13 years ago after reading a newspaper article about how a young orangutan cared for an orphan tiger cub in a nature reserve. I decided to contact Orangutan Outreach about the possibility of using the picture book to help them raise funds for their orangutan conservation program. They were interested, but I couldn't interest a publisher, so I started a crowdfunding site to raise money for the printing costs of the book, as I wanted to donate the royalties to help Orangutan Outreach with its fundraising campaign. Using My Cousin Ah Meng as inspiration, I began to write about a young orangutan who rescues an orphan tiger cub. I named the orangutan Ginger due to her vivid red hair and effervescent personality. The story reveals the struggle of the two characters as they fight for survival when the rainforest is set on fire to clear land for human development. I began to sketch out the storyboard in my sketchbook, where I had already begun to draw orangutans from photographs which Peter had taken while we were at Singapore Zoo. These are some of my early sketches and rough notes on orangutans. And here is the beautiful Ah Meng, drawn from Peter's reference photographs. I spent a lot of time developing the characters in my sketchbook. I didn't want to create a realistic orangutan, nor did I want to go too simple or cartoonish. What I wanted was something in between, a style which captured orangutan character, personality, expression and movement. The cover design for the book actually came from one of the first rough scribbles for the storyboard. I worked on the rough illustrations using my storyboard for reference, but making many changes, which is why everything is still very rough and very scribbly. I varied the draft layout with double and single page spreads. The creation of the final artwork took about 6 months. I usually do the rough draft illustration the same size as the book, but then I photocopy these and print them 15 to 20% bigger. Using a light box, I lightly trace the images onto watercolour paper and then work them up into final line art with pencil. The paper I always like to use is Fabriano Artistico, traditional white, hot press, 300 grams per square metre. Here is an example of a single page final artwork, an example of orangutan expression while eating a juicy rambutan fruit. The following 3 images show how I combined words and pictures.
Having now created all the final artwork and inserted all the words in InDesign, we then go to a printer and print out a mock copy of the full assembled book. Having confirmed everything with the book assembly mock-up, we now produce high-res printer files, and these are sent directly to the printer. The printer will then produce printer proof sheets for final approval before assembly. The overall print process can take anywhere between 6 and 9 weeks. Once they're all printed, the printer will then deliver them to your store. Having now produced the book, now is the time to really start promoting it. First of all, you need a good website, and we put all our books on littlepinkduckbooks.com, where it has its own unique page. We also then have a Facebook page where we put all details about the book itself and some examples of the pages. After that, we send copies, either hard or soft copies, to a number of book reviewers, and we look forward to receiving their comments, which again we place on our website. In order to stimulate sales, we also send the books to major buyers in the educational and the retail sector. Here is an example of the Big Old Rambutan Tree positioned on a stand in a local retail store. In order to help generate sales, the books are entered into a number of competitions. As Kathy mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, the whole purpose of producing the book was to raise funds to help in the conservation of the orangutan. Here are 5 orangutans that are currently being supported by the proceeds from this book, that are currently being looked after by orangutan outreach at their properties in Borneo and Sumatra.
The orangutan is still endangered in Sumatra and Borneo and still needs our help to ensure its survival in the wild.
You can help support the long-term survival of the orangutan by purchasing a copy of The Big Old Rambutan Tree at your local bookstore or through the website littlepinkduckbooks.com.